interesting too that the kinds of legal points that are beginning to emerge from this bottom-up legal challenges. For example, I was reading about the Kivalina cases. You know about Kivalina? It's this little island off the coast of Alaska. And basically there are 400 citizens there, and they have, I think, one cell phone there. And somehow they are still, they're proposing to take all these huge global corporations to court, this tiny little group. And it's because, and the advice I think they've been given is that, don't try the old route of saying they caused damage to us, we are now sinking because, under the waves sort of thing, because the ice is melting. Don't do that. Do it more as a sort of general risk. You are raising the risk level, the health risk to our people, because then you don't have to make A equals B, because people can always wriggle out of that. How do you know it was my flight that caused your death? You can't. But if you make it a more generalized risk, then who can say that, for example, airlines don't raise the risk? So very interesting, I think, ways of thinking are beginning to emerge out of this to empower people who would normally have felt disempowered. And it does feel like Cochabamba is a wonderful example of people feeling empowered and helping each other to feel empowered in every way.
Yeah, people power, absolutely. Just going back to this, the way that a lot of the mainstream, I call them mainstream NGOs, it's perhaps not the best way to term it, but some of the biggest NGOs in the world, the way that they are thinking about these issues is also moving in that direction. So when you talk about this need for empowerment, for that support to be there, we need to see it from all sides, from governments, as we're seeing from Bolivia, and others, from people, as we're also seeing in Bolivia, and from NGOs and others. And the head of research at Oxfam, Duncan Green, wrote a book 2 years ago now called From Poverty to Power, which was really Oxfam's recognition that we can no longer talk about poverty as being a product of economic causes, a product of social issues and so on only, but really as an issue of power.
Yeah,
and he looked at four different types of power. The power that people have over you, the power to change things, the power that you have to actually to come through and change things, the power that you can get by working with others, essentially, and then also powerlessness, where you really don't feel any power. And Bolivia and Cochabamba Summit hopefully is an expression of many of the world's indigenous communities, but many others who traditionally have felt powerless in an international system. And of course, in a country where Evo Morales has come from what was until very recently a fairly powerless minority in Bolivia to becoming the president, and being empowered by this process to actually recognize that they have power over their own lives as well, and power to work with others to change things.
It's really interesting that these countries, which are really grappling with democracy at a very powerful basic level, are the countries that generally in big media, in big northern media, like to think of themselves as spreading democracy, as George Bush used to talk about spreading democracy in the Middle East. I mean, nonetheless, they are the countries that are so scared of this real grassroots democracy.
We can go back, just to link this up to something we mentioned earlier, the Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, brought out really powerfully, I think, what made such devastating change happen in Latin America, especially in the 1970s. And that was the power that was wielded by the American government, by the CIA and others, in many countries to bring in, through force in many times, a new economic system proposed by the Chicago School, which absolutely devastated the lives of millions of Latin Americans. And that is now potentially coming in a way full circle to a point where there was this huge suppression which released this fissure of potential for change, which has gradually been filled by many indigenous movements, by groups in Brazil like the Landless Peasants Movement, the MST and others, who are no longer willing to accept that status quo, and through events like Cochabamba are starting on a world stage to express themselves and to express the power that they have, that they're investing in this necessary change.
I remember meeting some of the leaders of the Landless Peasants Movement in Porto Alegre, one of the very early World Social Forum movements, and that seemed to be a sort of bubbling up, and we carried on bubbling many parts of the world. But what is really interesting to me here is that there is this sense of bubbling up, but there is also a sense of focus with these working groups and the legal instruments. And I really hope that there is a sense of, of impact. I know impacts can be very diffused and profound, or they can be very sharp. And it would be nice to have the time just to do it the long-term, subtle way. But it would be great to have something quick as well, given the urgency.
As long as the risk, of course, is that the quick becomes violent. That's what we've seen in too many occasions, and what none of us want. And again, the World Social Forum perhaps is an example of where there was a fantastic wave of energy as it got going. In several years ago now, in 2002, I think was the first World Social Forum, was it? But that perhaps that energy, that desire to have something focused, has dissipated into this generic call for another world being possible, which is a fantastic creative space for discussion, but hasn't got that very clear framework coming out of it. And hopefully with Cochabamba we can see a much clearer framework.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for sharing your thoughts. Really, it's been really fascinating. And I hope you'll stay in touch with this and keep track of what's happening, send in your comments and questions, and get other people you know, since I think you know everybody. Please to keep checking in. We do have hundreds of tweets and people chatting in as well. And I hope that you'll encourage all your friends and connections to do so too. And, power to the people.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.